The Carax drifted quietly through the void of space, its dark silhouette contrasting sharply against the twinkling stars. This was a routine mission for the crew, another uncharted solar system to explore, another world to add to their ever-growing empire. The Carax was no ordinary vessel. It was a marvel of alien engineering, its hull sleek and hardened, capable of traversing hostile environments and surviving the fiercest of battles. Commander XLR, a being of great intellect and unparalleled physical prowess, stood at the helm, a figurehead of his species' unstoppable dominance. His people, the Xthar, had traveled the stars for millennia, conquering and absorbing the technologies of countless civilizations. Each planet they encountered was seen as a mere stepping stone in their path to galactic supremacy. The Xthar were cold, logical, and efficient pragmatic in their approach to war and conquest. Today, they had set their sights on a small, seemingly insignificant world in a remote corner of the galaxy, a planet that humans had recently begun to colonize. To XLR and his crew, humans were nothing more than another primitive species with little to offer. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, and their understanding of the universe barely scratched the surface. The Xthar had seen species like them before, weak, naive, and easily manipulated. It wasn't a matter of if they would conquer this planet, but when. They had landed in a dense forest, far from the human settlements, believing that the isolation would give them the element of surprise. Commander XLR could already taste the victory. It would be simple, almost too easy. They would assess the humans, neutralize any resistance, and claim the planet as their own. The crew disembarked, the air around them humming with the energy of their powerful suits and weapons. They moved through the trees, their steps light and calculated, careful not to disturb the environment too much. It was there, in the shadow of the towering trees, that they saw him, a lone human, strolling through the woods with an almost casual air about him. No armor, no weapon, nothing but the simple clothes on his back. This human seemed out of place, as if he were unaware of the impending doom that was about to befall him. Siler narrowed his eyes. Was he a scout? A lone survivor from one of the nearby human outposts? The commander couldn't help but be intrigued by this unexpected sight. The human, however, showed no sign of fear. No terror-filled eyes, no frantic movements. He simply walked with purpose, his gaze steady as it met the approaching aliens. Siler's suspicions began to grow. Perhaps this human was part of a larger resistance, someone sent to defend the planet from their invasion. But even that seemed improbable. After all, humans were not known for their military strength or advanced technology. The Xthar had superior weapons, better tactics, and far more experience. What could this solitary human possibly do against them? The crew of the Carax approached, their eyes scanning the human for any signs of hidden weapons or traps. The man remained calm, his posture relaxed, as though he was simply out for a walk on an ordinary day. The Xthar didn't even attempt to communicate at first, assuming the human would run or surrender out of fear. But instead, the human stood his ground, seemingly indifferent to the alien presence around him. Commander XLR, always keen on maintaining control, was the first to speak. His voice, sharp and authoritative, echoed through the quiet woods. "Human," he called out in the most common intergalactic tongue, "you are on the verge of becoming part of something far greater than your primitive world. Surrender yourself, and we will spare you. Fight, and you will be erased from existence. Choose wisely." The human didn't flinch. Instead, he took a slow breath, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not interested in joining anyone," he replied, his voice calm, almost casual. "And I don't plan on going anywhere either." Siler blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the audacity of the human's response. He had expected fear, desperation, or at the very least, a plea for mercy. Instead, this human, this insignificant creature was defying him without even raising his voice. There was something unsettling about his demeanor. The commander motioned to his officers, signaling them to remain alert. There was more to this human than met the eye. "Where are your weapons?" Siler demanded, stepping closer. The crew watched closely, eyes scanning for any hidden devices, but there was nothing. The human's clothes were simple, nothing that would indicate any weaponry. There were no signs of combat readiness, nothing at all that would suggest he was capable of posing any threat to them. He wasn't even carrying a backpack or any other items that might be useful in a confrontation. For all intents and purposes, he looked like an ordinary man, unarmed and defenseless. But something didn't sit right with Exeler. It wasn't just the human's calmness. It was something more. The commander's sharp eyes narrowed as he took a step closer, studying the human's every movement. There, tucked just beneath the human's waistband, was something that shouldn't be there, a small, almost invisible object at his belt. It was barely noticeable, a piece of technology that looked far too sophisticated for a primitive species like humanity. Jake Marshall, the human in question, met Exiler's gaze with a knowing look, as if he had anticipated the alien's reaction. "Don't make the mistake of underestimating me," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. The words hung in the air for a moment before Exiler could fully process their meaning. Something was off. Exiler felt a strange tingling at the back of his mind, a warning signal that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This human was not what he appeared to be. He wasn't simply a weak, defenseless creature ready to be captured and controlled. There was more to this human than any of the Exthar had ever encountered. But Exiler's pride and overconfidence clouded his judgment, and he chose to ignore the subtle shift in the air around them. He motioned for his crew to move in, to surround the human and neutralize him. But Jake Marshall's lips curled into a faint smile, one that spoke of secrets and untold stories. What the Exthar didn't realize, what they couldn't have known, was that this human wasn't just any colonist. He wasn't some defenseless civilian. He was a soldier trained, resourceful, and armed with technology they could never have imagined. The stage was set. The Karax had underestimated humanity, and Jake Marshall was about to show them just how wrong they were. Commander Exilar stepped forward, his long, sleek fingers raised in what he assumed would be a peaceful gesture. He had faced many species, many enemies in his time, and he believed he knew how to handle any situation. A show of authority, a quick demonstration of strength, and the problem was solved. But this man was different. Xyler was used to seeing fear in the eyes of those weaker species who had the misfortune of crossing his path. Yet, there was no fear in this human's gaze. In fact, there was nothing at all but a quiet confidence, an indifference that made Exiler uneasy. As he approached, the human, Jake Marshall, didn't flinch. Instead, he simply smirked, a slight curve of his lips that seemed to suggest a secret the Exthar couldn't yet grasp. Xyler's voice, smooth and commanding, broke the tense silence. "Surrender now, human. You do not understand the situation you're in." His words were in an alien language, one that most species across the galaxy could understand. It was direct, to the point. The humans, he assumed, would either comply out of fear or misunderstand and resist, in which case the Karax would deal with them swiftly. He was ready for either. But Jake, this strange human, just stood there, gazing up at Xyler as though nothing was at stake. "No thanks, I'm good," Jake replied casually, as if Xyler wasn't towering before him, his crew ready to overwhelm him. The words were simple, but they cut through the air like a blade. The crew stood still, confused. The commander's brow furrowed in frustration, the calmness of Jake's response a complete contradiction to what they expected. Here they were, beings of unmatched power and intellect, standing before a species they believed to be primitive, and yet this human wasn't even the slightest bit intimidated. Xyler, momentarily speechless, tried again. This time, he switched to the common tongue, the intergalactic language that humans were familiar with. His tone was sharp, demanding, "Are you alone? Where are your weapons?" Jake glanced around, as if he was searching for something to show. Then, slowly, he reached down and began pulling simple tools from his belt. There was nothing extraordinary about them. A knife, a small pack of food, a few other odd objects, nothing that seemed dangerous, nothing that looked like it could harm a fleet of advanced alien soldiers. It was laughable. "I've got everything I need," Jake said, his voice steady, unbothered. "Not much for carrying weapons." The Exthar crew looked at each other, exchanging puzzled glances. A primitive human without a weapon was one thing, but a human who didn't even have the common sense to arm himself? Their confusion grew. What kind of species would be so unprepared in a galaxy filled with countless dangers, constant wars, and battles that had shaped every race into something far more dangerous than this? Xyler studied Jake carefully, his mind working to process the situation. Perhaps this human had some form of defensive technology he was hiding, something concealed. There were rumors that humans had been developing strange new devices, but the commander didn't think they were close to any real breakthroughs. Still, there was a nagging feeling in his gut, a feeling that he couldn't ignore. His gaze shifted down to Jake's belt once more, this time with sharper focus. It wasn't just an ordinary belt. No, this was something much more. There was something off about it, something that didn't belong. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple piece of clothing, like any other accessory. But the more Xyler looked at it, the more he noticed subtle details. The belt seemed to hum with a barely detectable energy. The material wasn't like any fabric he had encountered. It was smooth, almost metallic in texture, with strange markings etched into it. As Jake adjusted it slightly, Xyler saw a small compartment open momentarily, revealing a brief flash of light and energy pulse that was immediately cloaked again. The alien commander froze. This was no ordinary human tool. The belt, despite its simple appearance, seemed to possess an unnatural level of sophistication. Embedded in the fabric were devices that Xyler recognized from his studies, a fusion of alien technology and what appeared to be human ingenuity. It didn't take long for him to realize that whatever this device was, it was far more advanced than anything the X-There had given humanity credit for. His mind raced, calculating possibilities. The belt was far more than just a belt. It had to be a portable power source, a reservoir of energy that could potentially be harnessed for weapons, shields, or even defensive tech beyond anything the aliens had anticipated. Xyler's trained eyes could now spot faint energy signatures radiating from it, energy signatures that no human-made object should possess. His crew had made a critical error. They had assumed this human to be just another weak, unarmed colonist. They were wrong. This belt was something else entirely. Jake Marshall was no fool. His casual demeanor was nothing more than a carefully constructed mask. Inside, he was calculating every movement, every second that passed. He knew the X-There were dangerous, but he also knew that they were relying on their assumptions, their arrogance. And that would be their downfall. He could see the change in the aliens' eyes, the uncertainty, the confusion, the realization that something was amiss. They had underestimated him, and now they were starting to realize Xyler processed the new information. He found himself questioning everything. His crew's easy victory, which he had assumed would be swift, was now uncertain. The human's belt, whatever it was a game-changer. There was no doubt in his mind now. The power hidden within it could easily turn the tide in a confrontation. The X-There had assumed they would crush humanity without resistance, but this human had something they didn't expect. Xyler's voice, though still calm, had lost some of its edge. "What is that?" he asked, his tone no longer as confident as before. The crew fell into an uneasy silence. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply gave the alien commander a knowing look, as if to say, "You're about to find out." His fingers brushed over the belt's surface, and for a brief moment, a soft hum filled the air, barely noticeable, but enough to make the hairs on the back of the alien's neck stand up. Jake didn't reveal any secrets, but he didn't have to. The device on his belt had already spoken volumes. The X-There were no longer certain. They no longer knew what they were dealing with. Xyler's eyes narrowed. He had made a mistake. This human wasn't just unarmed. He was dangerous, and the true scope of that danger was just beginning to unfold. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as Commander Xyler's gaze never left Jake Marshall. The crew of the Orcs stood frozen, eyes wide, trying to make sense of the puzzle before them. Their minds were still processing the strange discovery about the human's belt, a piece of equipment they had initially dismissed as insignificant. But now, as they observed the way the human's fingers lingered near the belt's strange compartments, they began to realize just how wrong they had been. There was something more to this human than they could have ever imagined. Xyler's command voice sliced through the silence. his authority unwavering despite the flicker of doubt that now crept into his mind. "Remove it. Now," he demanded, his words laced with an edge of impatience. Jake, however, didn't react as the commander expected. The human's expression remained unchanged, his calm demeanor almost infuriating. His eyes didn't flicker with fear or even curiosity. Instead, he smiled faintly, as if he had anticipated this exact moment. There was no hesitation in his response as he spoke. "This belt isn't just for show, you know," Jake said coolly, his voice almost casual. "It's not something you just take off." Zyler's lips curled into a slight sneer. "You dare defy me?" he said, his tone now colder, more dangerous. His cruise weapons, all of them pointing at Jake, seemed ready to fire at a moment's notice. But Jake didn't seem fazed. Instead, he simply shrugged, as if the threat didn't even matter. "What you're looking at is far more than a survival tool," Jake continued, his voice carrying a quiet confidence. "It's the product of everything humanity has learned the hard way. You see, we fought wars you couldn't even begin to imagine. And this belt? It's what I came up with to survive." There was a moment of silence as the aliens absorbed his words. Zyler's mind raced. A weapon? Was this human suggesting that his simple, unassuming belt was capable of defeating the Karoks? It didn't make sense. No species in the galaxy, certainly not a young, untested species like humanity, should possess the kind of technology that could stand up to the might of the Xthar. But as Jake's words echoed through the air, something deep within Zyler's mind clicked. He felt a chill run through him, the creeping realization that this was not an ordinary human. This was something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The commander's gaze turned sharp as he studied Jake more carefully, every detail of his form becoming clearer in his mind. Jake smiled again, this time with a knowing, almost smug expression. He knew exactly what was going through Zyler's mind, and he knew the aliens were about to make a crucial mistake. "I'm not just any colonist," Jake went on. "I'm a veteran. One of the last men standing after the war on Earth. The war that humanity fought against forces like yours and worse." Zyler blinked, momentarily caught off guard. A veteran of the war on Earth? This didn't make sense. Earth was nothing but a fledgling colony in their eyes, a young species that had no business in galactic affairs. The X there had barely even taken note of humanity's existence. They were far too busy conquering other worlds, building their empire. But as Jake's words sank in, Zyler realized that perhaps, just perhaps, they had underestimated humanity in ways they could not afford to. "The belt," Jake continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded Zyler, "isn't just a fashion accessory. It's a weapon, a tool, a means of survival. I designed it to protect myself and to do much more than that." He stepped back a pace, his fingers brushing lightly against the smooth surface of the belt, as though he were activating something. The X there watched closely, the air growing charged with anticipation. What was he about to do? Jake slowly, deliberately, explained the belt's capabilities. "Each part of this belt serves a specific purpose," he began, his tone almost matter-of-fact. "The central module contains energy reserves, enough to create force fields, charge up defensive shields, and even launch targeted EMP pulses. This part," he said, tapping a small section of the belt, "can manipulate energy. I can use it to disable your weapons, or better yet, send your own energy blast right back at you." "And this?" Jake pointed to a smaller compartment. "This one lets me bend and warp matter. It's not a weapon of mass destruction, but it's good enough to take down any individual or group that thinks they can take me on." Zyler stood frozen, his jaw tight. The realization came in a flash. This was no ordinary human tool. This wasn't a belt that a simple colonist could have crafted. This was a product of war, a weapon born out of necessity, designed to survive, to fight back against forces far greater than the Xthar could have imagined. Jake wasn't just a survivor, he was a warrior, and this belt was his most valuable weapon. The X there had believed that humanity's lack of galactic presence meant they were weak, defenseless, and easily dominated. But the belt told an entirely different story. Jake wasn't part of some backwater colony. He was a part of a species that had survived against overwhelming odds, a species that had learned to fight, to adapt, to outthink, and outmaneuver its enemies. And now, the HFY were standing face to face with a human who embodied that very spirit. The commander's mind raced, trying to process what this meant. They had been so sure of their superiority, so confident that humanity was nothing but a pitiful species to be conquered. But now, the Orcs found themselves in an entirely different situation. Jake saw the flicker of realization in Zyler's eyes and couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. He had been right all along. The HFY had assumed that humanity's place in the galaxy was insignificant. But this was the truth of humanity. They had always been resourceful, always found a way to survive. Even when they were on the brink of extinction, they had fought back with everything they had. "There's a lot more you don't know about us, HFY," Jake said, his voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of finality. "You may have underestimated humanity, but that's a mistake you won't live to regret." Zyler's confidence began to crumble as the weight of the situation hit him. He wasn't facing a defenseless colony anymore. He was facing a human who had the power to fight back and potentially win. The aliens had been too quick to dismiss humanity, and now they were starting to understand just how dangerous that mistake had been. This wasn't just a battle of weapons, it was a battle of wits, of survival, and of a species that had learned to never give up. The HFY were in for a fight they never expected. The tension in the air was palpable as HFY stood, his mind racing with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. He had ordered his crew to prepare for action, yet there was something almost absurd about the situation. How had they, the superior species, been brought to this point by a single human? Jake stood before them, calm and unyielding, his demeanor betraying no hint of fear or hesitation. It was as if he had already anticipated every move the HFY might make, and in that moment, Zyler realized the true depth of his miscalculation. With a sudden, fluid motion, Jake's hand brushed over the belt. A deep hum filled the air, and then, without warning, a pulse of energy erupted from the device. The ripple of power was visible to all, spreading like a wave through the atmosphere, distorting the air around Jake. It wasn't a massive explosion or a show of raw destructive force, but the effect was immediate and undeniable. The aliens, who had expected a conventional confrontation, found themselves caught off guard. The pulse was subtle but immensely effective. In an instant, the energy guns the Orc soldiers relied on flickered and died. The weapons, once humming with lethal energy, fell silent. The aliens stared at their weapons in disbelief, their once reliable tools now rendered useless. Zyler's eyes widened. He could feel the shift in the battle, the balance tipping in ways he hadn't anticipated. They had relied on their technology, advanced weaponry, shields, and superior physical strength, but none of that mattered now. They were facing something they had no defense against, the ingenuity of a single human and the technology strapped to his waist. Jake, unfazed by the scene unfolding around him, stepped forward. His movements were smooth, practiced, and every motion seemed deliberate. The belt's hum persisted, a quiet undercurrent to the chaos that surrounded them. But Jake wasn't rushing to attack. He didn't need to. Instead, he moved with an almost calculated ease, turning the tables in a way the aliens couldn't fathom. In one fluid motion, Jake raised his hand and a shimmering force field sprang to life in front of him. It was an invisible wall, but to the HFY, it was a massive barrier that they could not breach. The aliens tried to advance, their minds still processing the fact that they were no longer in control. Jake's eyes were sharp, calculating each step they took, and with a swift command to his belt, a series of blinding flashes of light shot out in every direction, disorienting the soldiers. The aliens were momentarily blinded, their senses overwhelmed by the intensity of the pulses. Zyler barked orders to his crew, but there was an underlying panic in his voice now. The aliens, though strong and highly trained, were no longer moving with the same confidence. The battlefield had shifted from a fight of strength to one of intelligence and adaptability. And Jake was winning. The humans, HFY realized, were not the simple, helpless creatures they had once thought. They were survivors, warriors, and above all, they were adaptable. The Exidar had built their empire on the strength of their technology and their ability to overpower weaker species. But humanity, with its unpredictable creativity and determination, had found a way to survive against overwhelming odds. And now, it was that very trait, human ingenuity, that was turning the tide in Jake's favor. Xyler's mind spun as he surveyed the battlefield. The Exthar, despite their superior numbers, were disorganized. Their weapons were useless. Their technology had been neutralized by a single human, and they had no countermeasures. The commander could feel his grip on the situation slipping. They had underestimated Jake Marshall, and now they were paying the price. Jake's eyes were focused, his every movement deliberate. He wasn't just relying on his technology, he was using his surroundings to his advantage, turning the forest around them into a battlefield of his design. The aliens, who had assumed the advantage with their strength and advanced weaponry, found themselves in a disorienting maze of energy fields and light pulses. Jake was controlling the pace of the battle, never allowing the Karax to regain their bearings. For every move they made, Jake had already anticipated it, countering with precision and ingenuity. He created barriers, manipulated the environment, and struck quickly when they least expected it. The aliens, accustomed to overwhelming force, were now reacting instead of attacking. Panic began to set in among the ranks as the reality of their situation dawned on them. They had been outsmarted by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Siler's mind raced, looking for any possible way to turn the tide. But as he watched his crew struggle to regain control, it became painfully clear that they were losing in the midst of the chaos. Jake's calm never wavered. His focus remained absolute, his actions calculated. He wasn't fighting a battle of brute strength. He was fighting with something far more dangerous: human ingenuity. He knew exactly how to use the belt's capabilities, pushing them to their limits, and as he did, he outmaneuvered the Karax at every turn. Xyler, standing at the center of the turmoil, felt the weight of his own failure. He had come here expecting an easy conquest, a simple addition to the Exthar Empire. But instead, he had found himself trapped in a contest of wits and will. The battle was no longer one of physical strength or firepower. It was about outsmarting the opponent, anticipating their every move, and adapting to the changing conditions. And in this contest, Jake had already proven to be the superior strategist. As the Karax soldiers regrouped, their efforts to retaliate seemed disjointed, ineffective. Jake continued to move, his actions fluid, his mind always 2 steps ahead. The force fields, the energy pulses, the rapid shifts in the environment, everything was working in his favor. The Exthar's strength was no match for his ingenuity, and with every passing moment, the odds seemed to shift further in his favor. Jake had proven that he didn't need advanced fleets or overwhelming numbers to win. All he needed was his belt, his wits, and his will to survive. The battle of wits had begun, and with it, the Karax had learned the most important lesson of all: underestimating humanity was their greatest mistake.